down the aisle, the entire underworld laughed. His bride wasn't a runway model or a glamorous socialite. She was Beatrice Gallagher, a heavy-set woman in a custom gown that drew cruel snickers from the most dangerous men in the city. They whispered the Don had lost his edge, that he was desperate, and they pitied him for his burden. But what those hardened criminals didn't know was that while they were busy laughing at her waistline, she was quietly memorizing their bank accounts, their secrets, and their weaknesses. And overnight the bride they mocked would become the only thing standing between her husband and total annihilation. The stained glass of Holy Name Cathedral cast long, fractured shadows across the marble floor. But the coldness inside the church had nothing to do with the bitter Chicago winter raging outside. It emanated entirely from the pews. Dominic Russo, the 34-year-old head of the Russo crime family, stood at the altar. He was a man carved from absolute authority, with sharp features, dark, unreadable eyes, and a tailored Brioni suit that screamed lethal power. Yet as the organ music swelled, the atmosphere among the 500 assembled guests made men, corrupt aldermen, union bosses, and rival family delegates was not one of respect. It was one of barely concealed amusement. The heavy oak doors at the back of the cathedral swung open. There stood Beatrice Gallagher. She was 28 years old, the last surviving heir of Arthur Gallagher, an Irish mob boss whose power had eroded over the last 2 decades into nothing but gambling debts and the single golden asset, ironclad ownership of the commercial shipping lanes on Lake Michigan. Dominic needed those ports to smuggle a massive influx of untraceable European weaponry and synthetic narcotics. Arthur Gallagher's price for the ports was a legitimate binding marriage to his daughter. Beatrice stepped into the aisle, her arm looped through her ailing father's. She was fat. She knew it. Her father knew it, and every single shark in the room knew it. Her wedding dress, a sprawling creation of ivory silk and heavy lace, was beautifully made, but it could not hide her broad shoulders, her thick waist, or the soft, round fullness of her face. She held her chin high, her green eyes locked dead ahead, refusing to look at the rows of whispering guests. "Look at the size of her," muttered Porligato, a caporigim in the Russo family, his voice carrying easily over the soft organ music. "Dominic's gonna need a forklift to carry her over the threshold." A ripple of low, gravelly laughter moved through the third row. Beside Paulie, Vincent Corrado, Dominic's trusted underboss and childhood friend, smirked behind his hand. The Mars truly noticed, not the swaggering couple of rusty docks. "It's a tragedy. I almost pity the guy. Look at him up there. He looks like he's walking to the electric chair." Dominic's expression remained terrifyingly blank. He watched his bride approach. He felt the humiliation radiating from his men, the loss of face in front of the New York delegates who had flown in to witness the merger. In their world, a Don's wife was supposed to be a trophy, a dazzling creature that commanded envy. Beatrice was a strategic acquisition, a bitter pill swallowed for the sake of empire. When Arthur handed Beatrice over to Dominic, the old Irishman's hands shook. "Take care of my girl, Rousseau," Arthur wheezed. Dominic didn't look at the old man. He offered his arm to Beatrice. "Let's get this over with," he murmured, his voice so low only she could hear it. Beatrice's jaw tightened, but she placed her gloved hand on his forearm. Her grip was surprisingly firm. "Try to smile, Dominic," she whispered back, her voice remarkably calm. "They're already laughing at you. Don't let them think you're crying too." Dominic's head snapped toward her, his dark eyes narrowing. For a fraction of a second he looked at her, really looked at her, not as a heavy burden, but as a person. But the priest began the Latin rites, and the moment vanished. The reception at the historic Drake Hotel was an exercise in pure endurance for Beatrice. Dominic sat beside her at the head table, drinking scotch and engaging in hushed, intense conversations with his capos, completely ignoring her existence. The wives of the made men, skeletal women drowning in diamonds and Botox, offered Beatrice fake, pitying smiles while actively refusing to speak to her. She sat there, a heavy girl in a heavy dress, looking like an interloper at her own wedding. But Beatrice wasn't crying. She wasn't shrinking into her chair. Instead, she observed. Because Beatrice was fat, people assumed she was slow. Because she was quiet, they assumed she was stupid. It was a prejudice she had weaponized her entire life. As she ate her catered filet mignon, her sharp eyes tracked the movements in the room. She watched Vincent Corrado slide a thick envelope to a union delegate who wasn't on the Russo payroll. She noticed the subtle, deferential nods Paul Legato gave to the emissaries of the Costello family arrival syndicate when Dominic wasn't looking. They think Dominic is weak because he married me, Beatrice realized, sipping her sparkling water. And because they think he's weak, they are getting sloppy. By midnight, Dominic stood up, adjusting his cuffs. "The car is out front," he told her coldly. "We're leaving." He didn't take her hand as they walked out. Everyone in the ballroom watched them go, the pity in their eyes mixing with quiet contempt. They thought they had just witnessed the beginning of the end of the Russo Empire. The Russo estate in Lake Forest was a sprawling stone monstrosity, isolated behind wrought-iron gates and state-of-the-art security. For the first 3 months of their marriage, it served as a gilded cage for Beatrice. Dominic's rules, laid out on their wedding night, had been brutal and clear. "You get the east wing, I sleep in the west," he had told her, loosening his tie in the grand foyer. "You have an unlimited black card. Buy whatever you want, decorate, eat, shop, I don't care. The staff will attend to your needs. You do not interfere in my business. You do not ask questions, and you stay out of my way." "Understood," Beatrice had replied smoothly, showing absolutely no emotion. And she had kept her word. To the house staff, the new Mrs. Russo was exactly what they expected, a lazy, overweight woman who spent her days in her suite ordering massive amounts of food and avoiding the gym. They gossiped about her in the kitchens, rolling their eyes when she requested coffee and pastries at odd hours of the night. But behind the locked mahogany double doors of the East Wing Master Suite, Beatrice was not eating pastries. She was working. Arthur Gallagher had been a terrible mob boss, but he had recognized his daughter's brilliance early on. While other mob daughters were getting manicures, Beatrice had been secretly sent to the University of Chicago under an assumed name, earning a master's degree in forensic accounting and data analytics. She possessed a terrifyingly analytical mind. Sitting cross-legged on her king-sized bed in a silk robe, Beatrice had 3 heavy-duty laptops open in front of her. The screens bathed her face in a pale blue glow. She had started small. Amidst using the estate's Wi-Fi, she had bypassed the router security and accessed Dominic's home office servers. What she found there horrified her. Dominic was a brilliant tactician on the streets, but he was a dinosaur when it came to modern digital finance. He relied entirely on his underboss, Vincent Corrado, to manage the complex web of shell companies, real estate holdings, and offshore accounts that laundered the Russo blood money. Vincent, Beatrice discovered, was systematically gutting the empire from the inside out. "You arrogant idiot," Beatrice muttered to herself, staring at a spreadsheet she had decrypted. Vincent had created a network of phantom contractors attached to the Russos' legitimate construction firms. Every month, millions of dollars meant to be washed and deposited into Dominic's primary holding accounts were being siphoned off to a series of Cayman Island trusts. Beatrice cross-referenced the trust names. They were registered under the maiden names of Vincent's known mistresses. But embezzlement wasn't the worst of it. Beatrice hacked into the dispatch logs of the very shipping ports her father had traded for her marriage. She saw the schedules for Dominic's incoming cargo. Then she accessed public municipal traffic cameras around the ports. She overlaid the data. Whenever a massive Russo shipment of untaxed goods was due, Vincent's personal burner phone, which Beatrice was tracking via a cloned SIM, signal pinged a cell tower located in the heart of Costello family territory. Vincent isn't just stealing, Beatrice realized, a cold chill running down her spine. He's selling Dominic out to Carmine Costello. He's starving the Russo family of cash while handing their inventory over to the enemy. And he's timing it so it looks like the business is just failing. Downstairs, she heard the heavy front doors open. It was 3 a.m. Dominic was home. Beatrice closed her laptops and slipped out of her room, walking softly to the top of the grand staircase. She looked down. Dominic was leaning heavily against the marble wall of the foyer. His coat was torn and blood was dripping from his knuckles onto the pristine floor. He looked exhausted, cornered, and deeply alone. He poured himself a glass of bourbon from a side table with shaking hands. Beatrice watched him. She knew what the men thought of him now. She had heard the whispers through the old Irish dockworkers who still maintained fierce loyalty to the Gallagher bloodline, and reported back to her via untraceable encrypted apps. The streets were saying Dominic was distracted by his wail of a wife, that he was losing his grip, that his judgment was clouded. Vincent was actively planting the narrative that Dominic's marriage to Beatrice was a sign of mental decline. He's bleeding out, and he doesn't even know who holds the knife, she thought. She could have let him fall. He had treated her like a piece of unwanted furniture. But Beatrice loved the man who had, despite his coldness, kept his word to protect her father's pension. She looked at the empire that was legally half hers. Not on my watch, she whispered into the darkness. The crisis hit with the force of a freight train on a dreary Tuesday morning in November. Beatrice was in the estate's conservatory, quietly tending to some orchids, when the roar of Dominic's armored SUV tearing up the driveway shattered the silence. Doors slammed. Men were shouting. She walked toward the main hallway and stopped out of sight, listening. Dominic burst into his home office, followed closely by Vincent Corrado and Paul Legato. How the hell did the feds know? Dominic roared, the sound of glass shattering indicating he had swept everything off his desk. 2 tons of product, Vincent. 3 months of logistical planning. The DEA was waiting at the exact dock. At the exact minute the container dropped, that was $20 million in pure, unwashed capital. Boss, you gotta calm down, Vincent's voice was smooth, pacifying. But Beatrice could hear the underlying edge of triumph in it. We have a leak. It's obvious. A leak. I run a ghost ship. Dominic snarled. Maybe not anymore, Paulie chimed in carefully. Boss, ever since the wedding, things had been slipping. You've been spending a lot of time out here in Lake Forest. The men, they're getting anxious. They're saying the Gallagher ports were a cursed deal. They're saying you're losing focus. Are you blaming my wife for a DEA raid, Paulie? Dominic's voice dropped to a lethal whisper. I'm just saying what the streets are saying, Dom. Paulie backed off slightly. It gets worse, Vincent said heavily. I got a call from our bankers in Geneva this morning. The backup accounts, the emergency funds, frozen. Someone flagged them for audit. We have no liquid cash, Dominic. We can't pay the aldermen, we can't pay the precinct captains, and we can't pay the men this week. Silence fell over the room, a heavy, suffocating silence. A mob boss who couldn't pay his soldiers was a dead man walking. Carmine Costello called. Vincent continued, twisting the knife. He heard about the raid. He wants a sit-down tonight. Neutral ground, the old slaughterhouse in the meat-packing district. Just you, him, and a couple of seconds. He says he wants to help us through this transitional period. It's a power play, Dominic growled. He smells blood. We have to take the meeting, Dom, Vincent urged. If we don't show, it's a sign of ultimate weakness. The whole city will turn on us by morning. We negotiate a temporary loan from Costello, and we buy time to find the rat. From her hiding spot, Beatrice's blood ran cold. The Swatterhouse. It was an isolated acoustic dead zone. She had intercepted a text message from Vincent's burner phone to a Costello lieutenant just 4 hours ago. It wasn't a sit-down. It was an execution. Vincent was going to murder Dominic there, blame it on Costello, and step up as the new, reluctant Don of the Russo family, backed by Costello's muscle and the stolen millions in the Caymans. Fine, Dominic sounded defeated. We go at midnight. Tell the men to gear up. The office door opened and Vincent and Paulie walked out. Beatrice pressed herself flat against the alcove wall as they passed. Like taking candy from a blind baby, Vincent muttered to Paulie, a wide grin spitting his face. Have the cleaning crew ready for tomorrow. The fat bitch gets a bullet the second we confirm Dom is dead. Beatrice waited until the front doors closed. She took a deep breath, smoothing down her cashmere sweater over wide hits. The time for hiding in the shadows was over. She walked into the office. Dominic was sitting behind his desk, his face buried in his hands. The ruthless shark of Chicago looked completely broken. You need to cancel the meeting tonight, Beatrice said, her voice clear and ringing in the silent room. Dominic's head snapped up. His eyes were bloodshot. Get out, Beatrice. I told you never to come in here. I said, cancel the meeting, Dominic. She stepped further into the room, kicking the door shut behind her. You are walking into an ambush. Vincent is going to put a bullet in the back of your head the second the doors close, and he's going to use the 20 million he stole from you to pay off your loyalists tomorrow. Dominic froze. The anger in his face was momentarily eclipsed by sheer confusion. What did you just say? Beatrice walked up to the heavy mahogany desk. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a sleek black USB drive, dropping it directly onto the polished wood. You married me because you thought I was a pathetic, desperate, heavy girl whose only value was a piece of paper signed by my father, Beatrice said, leaning over the desk, planting her hands firmly on the surface. And while you and your men were busy laughing at me, I audited your entire miserable empire. Dominic stared at the drive, then up at her. You? You audited me? Vincent has been siphoning your construction fronts into 3 Cayman trusts. I have the routing numbers, she fired off, rapid and clinical. He tipped off the DEA this morning using a burner phone. I tracked the GPS location. He made the call from a diner 2 blocks from Paulie Gatto's house. And the Geneva accounts aren't frozen by an audit, Dominic. They were drained. Dominic shot to his feet, knocking his chair back. You're lying. Vincent is blood. He's my brother. You're a Gallagher. I am trying to save your life. Beatrice yelled, slamming her fist on the desk. Plug in the drive, Dominic. Look at the ledgers. Look at the cell tower pings. Do you think I care enough about your bruised ego to make this up? Your brother is selling your corpse to Carmine Costello tonight. Dominic hesitated, his chest heaving. He snatched the USB drive and jammed it into his laptop. For 10 agonizing minutes, the only sound in the room was the clicking of his mouse as he scrolled through thousands of pages of irrefutable, damning evidence Beatrice had meticulously compiled. He saw the transfers. He saw the encrypted messages she had cracked. He saw the betrayal laid out in stark black and white data. When Dominic finally looked up, all the color had drained from his face. The man who looked back at Beatrice wasn't just a boss. He was a man who realized he had been blind. And looking at his heavy, quiet wife, he realized he had been blind about her, most of all. We have no money, Dominic said, his voice hollow. Even if I kill Vincent, I can't pay the men tomorrow. A mutiny is inevitable. The Empire is dead, Beatrice. Beatrice stood up straight, a slow, predatory smile spreading across her face. It was the smile of an apex predator. Who said we have no money? She asked softly. Did you really think I just sat here and watched him steal from my husband? Dominic stared at her. What did you do? I must. Before Vincent could transfer the final 40 million out of the holding companies this morning, I initiated a counter-hack through the Gallagher port servers, Beatrice said, checking her watch. I intercepted the wire transfers. I routed the funds through a dozen cryptocurrency tumblers and deposited them into a secure, decentralized vault that only I have the key to. Dominic was speechless. You stole $40 million from my underboss. I saved $40 million, Beatrice corrected him. And tonight we're going to use it to buy back your city. But first, we have to deal with the rat in your house. Dominic Russo stood frozen in the center of his demolished office, staring at the woman he had actively ignored for 3 months. Beatrice didn't shrink back from his gaze. She stood firmly, her wide hips planted, her arms crossed over her cashmere sweater. For the first time since their wedding day, Dominic truly saw her. She wasn't the burden he had pitied. She was the anchor he desperately needed. 40 million, Dominic repeated, the number rolling off his tongue like a foreign language. He ran a hand through his dark hair, pacing the length of the room. Vincent has the men's loyalty right now because they think I'm broke and distracted. If I walk out there and put a bullet in his head, Paulie and the rest of his crew will start a civil war. I need to prove he's a rat, and I need to do it publicly. You can't touch Vincent here, Beatrice said coolly, walking over to the laptop. Her thick fingers flew across the keyboard with practiced precision. If Vincent dies before the midnight meeting, Carmine Costello will know the ambush is compromised. He'll send his entire syndicate to our front gates. We have to let Vincent think he's winning. We have to walk right into his trap. Dominic stopped pacing. Walk into a slaughterhouse with a man who plans to shoot me in the back? Yes, Beatrice said, finally looking up, a dangerous glint in her green eyes. But you won't be walking in blind, and you won't be walking in broke. She hit the enter key. I just wired $5 million in clean, untraceable cryptocurrency into the private offshore accounts of your 5 most loyal capos. Men who hate Vincent. Men like Sal Maroni and old Leo Lombardo. The transfers are pending. They will clear in exactly 1 hour. Dominic's jaw dropped. Sal and Leo were old-school muscle, fiercely loyal to the Russo name but deeply disillusioned by the recent financial drought. Now, Beatrice instructed, her voice taking on the commanding cadence of a battlefield general, you are going to call Sal and Leo. You are going to tell them to check their balances. And then you are going to tell them that the rest of their back pay is contingent on them following my exact orders tonight. Dominic looked at his Heavyset bride, feeling a strange, unfamiliar jolt of adrenaline mixed with something that felt dangerously like awe. The men in his world liked their women, small, fragile, and decorative. But as Beatrice stood there, solidly occupying her space, exuding pure, unadulterated power, Dominic realized he had married a titan. What's the play, Beatrice? He asked, his voice dropping to a low, respectful hum. Vincent thinks he controls the board because he controls the information, Beatrice explained, pulling up a schematic of the meatpacking district on the monitor. He chose the old West Loop slaughterhouse because it's a dead zone for cell signals. He thinks no one can call for backup. But he's a dinosaur. He doesn't know about the dedicated fiber optic lines the city installed underground last year for the new high-frequency trading servers. She pointed to a red line intersecting the blueprint. I can access the slaughterhouse internal security system through that line. I can control the hydraulic doors, the lighting, and the PA system. I will have eyes and ears on the entire meeting. Dominic leaned over the desk, his shoulder brushing against hers. He felt the warmth radiating from her, the steady, calm rhythm of her breathing. And Costello? Costello is a businessman, Beatrice said, turning her head to meet his gaze. They were inches apart. He is backing Vincent because Vincent promised him a hostile takeover with 0 financial risk. We are going to change the math. I've spent the last 3 hours digging through Costello's digital footprint. He uses a shell company registered in Delaware, managed by a proxy at a private wealth division in Geneva, to wash his extortion money. I have the SWIFT codes. I have the routing numbers. I have his entire life's work locked behind a 256-bit encryption key on my server. Dominic let out a low whistle, a predatory grin finally breaking through his exhaustion. You're going to hold his money hostage. I'm going to hold his freedom hostage, Beatrice corrected. If he doesn't play ball tonight, I forward the unredacted ledgers to the director of FinCEN and the FBI field office in Chicago. Carmine Costello will spend the rest of his life in a federal penitentiary. Dominic reached out, his hand hovering for a second before he gently grasped her shoulder. It was the first time he had touched her with any real intention since he forced the ring onto her finger. They laughed at me for marrying you, he whispered, his eyes dark and intense. Let them laugh, Beatrice replied, her voice soft but absolute. By tomorrow morning there won't be a man left alive who thinks you're a joke. The midnight air in the West Loop was bitter, carrying the metallic scent of Lake Michigan and the lingering ghost of raw meat. The abandoned slaughterhouse loomed at the end of a deserted alleyway, a massive windowless brick fortress. Dominic stepped out of his SUV, the collar of his wool coat turned up against the wind. Flanking him were Vincent Corrado and Paulie Gatto. They had insisted on coming in a single car, a show of unity. Dominic knew it was just to ensure he didn't bring extra muscle. Just stay calm, Dom, Vincent said, clapping a heavy hand on Dominic's shoulder. The fake brotherly concern made Dominic sick to his stomach. Let me do the talking. Costello is arrogant, but he respects logic. We'll offer him a higher percentage on the waterfront shipments, buy ourselves some breathing room. Sure, Vince, Dominic muttered, keeping his eyes fixed on the heavy steel roll-up door. You always know best. Paulie pulled the heavy chain and the door rattled upward with a deafening screech. Inside, the air was freezing. Row upon row of rusted iron meat hooks hung from the ceiling tracks, swaying slightly in the draft. A single bank of industrial halogen lights illuminated the center of the kill floor. Standing in the pool of light was Carmine Costello. He was a silver-haired shark in a vicuña coat, surrounded by 4 men holding suppressed submachine guns. Dominic walked forward, his footsteps echoing on the concrete. Vincent and Paulie walked half a step behind him. Dominic, Costello greeted, his voice a smooth, gravelly purr. Look at you, the great dawn of the Russo family, coming to me with his hat in his hand. Your father would be spinning in his grave. Let's skip the theater, Carmine, Dominic said coldly, stopping 10 feet away. You wanted to sit down, here I am. Costello chuckled, pulling a silver cigar case from his pocket. I didn't call this meeting to negotiate, Dominic. I came to accept your surrender. Your accounts are dry, your men are starving, and your judgment is compromised. The streets say you spend all your time feeding that whale of a wife you bought from Arthur Gallagher. Out. Moi. Dominic's eyes turned murderous, his fists clenching at his sides. He waited for the cue. That's enough, Carmine, Vincent said, stepping out from behind Dominic. But he didn't step forward to defend his boss. He stepped to the side, distancing himself. Slowly, deliberately, Vincent reached inside his jacket and pulled out a matte black Glock 19. He didn't point it at Costello. He pointed it squarely at the back of Dominic's head. Paulie mirrored the action, drawing his own weapon and aiming it at Dominic's chest. I'm sorry, Dom, Vincent said, his voice dripping with mock regret. But you're bad for business. The family needs strong leadership. Not a man who sold his dignity for a few rusty docks and a fat Irish bride. Costello smiled, lighting his cigar. Make it quick, Vincent. I hate the smell of this place. Vincent cocked the hammer. Nothing personal, brother. BZZZT. A deafening blast of static erupted from the overhead PA system, so loud it caused Vincent and Paulie to flinch, their guns wavering. Before anyone could recover, the massive hydraulic steel doors at the front and back of the slaughterhouse slammed down with a ground-shaking boom, locking into place. The secondary halogen lights flared to life, blindingly bright, flooding the perimeter of the kill floor. From the rusted speakers above, a calm, distinctly feminine voice echoed through the cavernous room. "I wouldn't pull that trigger, Vincent, unless you want to spend your last few seconds on Earth watching your retirement fund burn." Vincent froze. He looked wildly around the empty catwalks. "What the hell is that? Dom, what is this?" Costello's men raised their weapons, scanning the shadows. "Who is that?" Costello demanded, his smooth facade cracking. "It's the whale," Beatrice's voice replied smoothly. Suddenly, the rusted iron door of the foreman's office on the second-story catwalk slammed open. Beatrice stepped out onto the grating. She wasn't hiding. She wore a tailored, floor-length black wool trench coat that draped elegantly over her heavy frame, a stark contrast to the gritty, blood-stained industrial nightmare around her. She looked down at the men below like a queen observing a riot in a peasant village. Standing directly behind her was Sal the Anvil Maroney, holding an assault rifle, his face a mask of brutal loyalty. Down on the floor, the shadows suddenly moved. From the side access tunnels, 30 heavily armed men poured out, surrounding the center ring. Half of them were Russo loyalists, the capos Dominic had paid earlier that evening. The other half were enormous bearded Irish dockworkers, gripping shotguns and iron pipes, eyes burning with Gallica loyalty. Vincent panicked, pressing his gun harder against Dominic's head. "Back off. I'll blow his brains out." "I swear to God." "Shoot him," Beatrice said from the catwalk. Her voice was ice. "Shoot him, Vincent. But know this, the second Dominic's heart stops, my finger comes off this tablet." She held up an iPad. "And the $40 million you stole from my husband, currently sitting in your 3 Cayman Island trusts under the names of your mistresses, gets donated to the Chicago Police Department Widows and Orphans Fund." Vincent's face drained of color. "You're bluffing. You don't have access to those accounts." "Account ending in 4492. Account ending in 811. Account ending in 9004. Beatrice read off flawlessly. "I hacked your offshore proxies this morning while you were busy trying to frame my husband for a DA raid." She turned her gaze to the rival boss. "And you, Carmine." Costello narrowed his eyes. "You're playing a dangerous game, little girl." "I'm not playing, Carmine. I'm doing the math," Beatrice said. "Right now, an automated script is running on an R server in Zurich. If I don't enter the abort sequence in exactly 3 minutes, the unredacted digital ledgers of your money laundering run through the Geneva private wealth sector will be forwarded to the FBI, including the bribe you paid to federal Judge Higgins last Tuesday." Costello swallowed hard. The cigar slipped from his fingers, hitting the concrete floor. He knew exactly what ledgers she was talking about. It was his most closely guarded secret. "Dominic." Beatrice's voice softened just a fraction, echoing through the slaughterhouse. "Tell Mr. Costello his options." Dominic didn't flinch. He didn't turn around. He simply looked at Costello, a chilling, triumphant smile spreading across his face. He felt the phantom weight of the gun against his head, but he had never felt safer in his entire life. "Option A, Carmine," Dominic said, his voice carrying the absolute authority of a true Don. "You side with a rat who couldn't even hide his stolen money from my wife. You kill me, you get locked in his room with 50 heavily armed men, and tomorrow morning you become the FBI's most wanted man." Dominic slowly turned his back on Costello, finally facing the man holding the gun to his head. Vincent was trembling. "Option B," Dominic continued softly. "You recognize who truly holds the power in Chicago. You go back to your territory, you never cross my borders again, and you let me take out the trash in my own house." Costello looked up at the heavy woman on the catwalk. He saw the cold, uncompromising intelligence in her eyes. She wasn't a liability, she was a weapon of mass destruction. "Lower your weapons," Costello barked at his men. He looked at Dominic, giving a slow, respectful nod. "Option B. You have my word, Rousseau. And my compliments on your marriage." Vincent realized he was entirely alone. He dropped the gun, falling to his knees. "Dom, please. We grew up together." "Dom, I'm sorry." Dominic picked up the discarded Glock. He didn't look angry anymore. He just looked tired. "You should have never laughed at my wife, Vincent," Dominic said. A single gunshot echoed through the slaughterhouse. The gunshot rang through the cavernous expanse of the West Loop slaughterhouse, the sound bouncing off the rusted iron meat hooks and the blood-stained concrete. Vincent Corrado's body hit the floor with a heavy, sickening thud. Silence descended, absolute and suffocating, save for the hum of the overhead industrial halogens. Dominic Russo lowered the Glock, his breathing steady, his face an impenetrable mask. He didn't look down at the man he had once called a brother. Instead, he looked up at the catwalk. Beatrice stood there, bathed in the harsh light, the black wool of her coat wrapping around her heavy frame like imperial armor. She didn't flinch at the violence. She merely lowered the iPad to her side. "Sal," Dominic's voice broke the quiet, echoing with cold authority. "Sal the Anvil." Maroney stepped out from behind Beatrice, his rifle still trained on the floor. "Yes, boss. Clean this up. Clean this up. Take Paulie to the basement of the old Cicero warehouse. I'll deal with him tomorrow." Dominic turned his gaze to the remaining Russo men, the soldiers who had spent the last 3 months whispering about his downfall. "The rest of you, you will find an extra $50,000 in your offshore accounts by sunrise. A gift from my wife. Any man who ever utters a word of disrespect about her again will not get a bullet. He will get handed over to her." A collective shudder ran through the hardened criminals. They looked up at the quiet, heavy-set woman who had just brought Carmine Costello to his knees with a few keystrokes. They bowed their heads in absolute submission. The ride back to the Lake Forest estate was draped in a heavy, charged silence. The armored SUV glided silently along the dark expanse of Sheridan Road. Dominic poured 2 fingers of Macallan 25 from the car's crystal decanter and offered it to Beatrice. She took it, her fingers brushing his. His skin was warm, thrumming with residual adrenaline. $40 million, Dominic murmured, staring out the tinted window at the freezing waters of Lake Michigan. "You orchestrated a digital coup from my guest bedroom." "You made a strategic error, Dominic," Beatrice said, taking a slow sip of the scotch. The liquid burned peasantly down her throat. "You treated me like a liability. In our world, liabilities get liquidated. I simply chose to become an asset before Vincent could do the math." Dominic turned to look at her. The streetlights flickered across the soft, round curves of her face, highlighting the sharp, predatory intelligence in her green eyes. For 3 months, he had been blind to her. He had seen only the physical space she occupied, judging her by the shallow, misogynistic metrics of the underworld. Now he saw the titanium spine beneath the cashmere. He saw a woman who didn't need to be protected, but a woman capable of destroying his enemies without breaking a sweat. "I underestimated you, Beatrice," Dominic said, his voice dropping an octave, losing its usual icy edge. "I apologize. It will never happen again." It was the closest thing to total submission a Don could offer. Beatrice met his gaze, a slow smile playing on her lips. "See that it doesn't, because the real work starts tomorrow." The purge of the Russo family was swift, brutal, and entirely bloodless. When morning broke over Chicago, Beatrice set up a command center in Dominic's grand office. She didn't stay hidden in the East Wing anymore. She sat at the massive mahogany desk, 2 monitors glowing brightly, systematically dismantling the infrastructure of treason Vincent had built. She didn't need hitmen to deal with the corrupt union bosses who had conspired against her husband. She used the dark web to leak the exact coordinates of their illicit offshore shell companies in the British Virgin Islands directly to the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. Paulie Gatto, whimpering in the Cicero basement, expected torture. Instead, Dominic walked in and handed him a one-way plane ticket to Anchorage, Alaska, and a single file folder. Inside were printouts of Paulie's secret gambling debts, routed through an illegal syndicate in Macau, and photographs of Paulie's mistresses. "My wife transferred exactly $100 into your bank account, Paulie," Dominic had told the trembling capo. "She also set up a dead man switch on an Aura server in Zurich. If you ever return to the lower 48, or if you ever try to contact a made man in Chicago, a script will automatically email this folder to your wife, Carmine Costello, and the head of the McCaw triad you owe money to. Enjoy the snow." By the end of the week, the Russo family was terrifyingly lean, incredibly wealthy, and fiercely loyal. The streets whispered, but they no longer laughed. The narrative had shifted violently. The Don hadn't lost his mind. He had married a witch, a mastermind who could freeze your bank accounts, redirect your shipments, and erase your identity before you even knew you were at war. But power, Beatrice knew, was a living, breathing entity. It needed to be fed, and it needed to be protected. One evening, deep into winter, Beatrice was in the study, reviewing the logistics for a massive influx of untraceable European weaponry set to arrive at the Gallagher ports. Dominic walked in, carrying 2 glasses of wine. He wore a tailored charcoal suit, his tie loosened. The raw exhaustion that had plagued him for months was gone, replaced by the dangerous, sleek confidence of a king who knew his borders were secure. He handed her a glass and leaned against the edge of the desk, looking down at her. "The delegates from the 5 families in New York are requesting a sit-down," Dominic noted, his dark eyes tracing the line of her neck. "They heard what happened to Costello. They want to renegotiate the Midwest distribution percentages. They think they can squeeze us because we just restructured." Beatrice took a sip of her Cabernet, leaning back in her heavy leather executive chair. She crossed her thick legs, completely comfortable in her own skin, completely aware of the weight of her presence. "Let them come. I've already run the projections. We control 70% of the Great Lakes maritime smuggling routes. The New York families rely on our ports to bypass the Atlantic seaboard embargoes. They will demand a 30% cut," Dominic said, a faint smirk touching his lips. He loved watching her work. He was utterly captivated by her mind. "Offer them 12, Beatrice countered smoothly. "When they balk, remind them that the Port Authority manifest software operates on a proprietary encryption key that I design. If they threaten a war, I will blind their logistics network from Montreal to Miami. They'll be flying blind in a blizzard." Dominic chuckled, a low, rich sound that sent a surprising thrill down Beatrice's spine. He reached out, his hand gently cupping her jaw. His thumb traced the soft curve of her cheek. "You are a terrifying creature, Beatrice Rousseau," he whispered, his face inching closer to hers. "I am exactly what you needed," she replied, not breaking eye contact. "Yes," Dominic breathed, his lips brushing against hers. "You are?" It wasn't a kiss born of obligation or contract. It was a collision of equals. Dominic kissed her with a fierce, consuming hunger, his hands tangling in her hair. Beatrice kissed him back, pulling him down by the lapels of his suit, cementing their partnership in the quiet shadows of the empire they now ruled together. Spring arrived in Chicago, thawing the ice on Lake Michigan. But the chilling grip the Russo family held on the city had never been stronger. 6 months had passed since the slaughterhouse. Beatrice was no longer just the Don's wife. She was the syndicate's chief architect. She managed the legitimate fronts, the real estate holdings, the luxury car dealerships, the downtown high-rises, while actively laundering the proceeds of Dominic's underworld empire through a labyrinth of decentralized finance protocols. But a kingdom built on blood and secrets is never truly at peace. The final test came from the one entity Beatrice couldn't simply out-hack: the federal government. Special was the man who had orchestrated the port raid that Vince the Russo family had bounced back so quickly, seemingly immune to financial ruin. He had spent months digging, looking for the weak link, and he made the fatal mistake of assuming that link was and cornered Beatrice on a Tuesday afternoon as she was leaving a high-end boutique on the Magnificent Mile. The sky was a pale, crisp blue, the sidewalks bustling with oblivious tourists. Mrs. Russo was a tall, athletic man with a condescending sneer. "Do you have a minute? I think it's time we had a talk about your husband." Beatrice Security detailed two massive enforcers, hand-picked by Saul, instantly moved to intercept, their hands drifting beneath their jackets. Beatrice raised a single gloved hand. The enforcers stopped, their voice perfectly pleasant, her face betraying zero emotion. She adjusted her designer handbag over her arm. "To what do I owe the pleasure? I know what happened." Close, trying to use his height to intimidate her. "I know he didn't just disappear. And I know about the sudden massive influx of liquid capital into the Russo holding companies. You're washing his money, Beatrice. I have subpoenas drafted for the Gallagher port servers. I can offer you immunity, full witness protection. You don't have to go down with the sinking ship. I know Dominic treats you like garbage. I know you're just a pawn in his game. Help me put him away." Beatrice looked at the federal agent. She didn't see a threat. She saw a math problem, the very symptom. Beatrice began, her voice soft, adopting the tone of a teacher addressing a particularly slow student. "Before you draft a subpoena, you should ensure your own house is about." "You have a lovely home in Evanston," Beatrice said smoothly, ignoring his question. "A beautiful wife, 2 daughters in private school. It's expensive, especially on a GS-13 government salary. So expensive, in fact, that last year you took out a sacrifice, went completely still." "How do you know that?" "I know," Beatrice continued, her green eyes locking onto his, "because last week my newly acquired shell company, Aegis Financial, purchased the debt portfolio of that. I own the mortgage to your house." Harrison stepped back, the color draining from his face. You can't." "I also know," Beatrice pressed the advantage, her voice dropping to a lethal whisper, "that the down payment for that second mortgage came from an offshore account in the Caymans. The exact same offshore account that received a wire transfer from a known cartel associate 3 years ago. You've been taking bribes to look the other way on the southern border routes, haven't you, Thomas?" His eyes. "It's a digital reality," Beatrice corrected. "I have the IP logs, I have the Swift codes. I have the encrypted emails. If you ever say my husband's name again, if you ever look in the direction of my ports again, I will foreclose on your home on a Monday, and by Tuesday I will forward your financial history to the Office of the Inspector General." She stepped closer to him, her heavy presence now feeling like an inescapable gravitational pull. "You for me now. When a shipment comes in, you ensure the DEA is looking at the opposite side of the lake." Dismissed as a fat, helpless pawn, he saw the cold, mechanical ruthlessness of an apex predator. He swallowed hard, defeated. "Yes. Yes. Good." Beatrice smiled pleasantly. "Have a wonderful day." That weekend, the Russo Syndicate hosted their 1-year anniversary gala. It was held in the legendary Gold Coast room of the Drake Hotel, the exact same ballroom where Beatrice had endured the snickers and pity of the underworld on her wedding night. The room was packed with the elite of Chicago's criminal and political spheres. Mayors, aldermen, and dons from across the country mingled under the crystal chandeliers. But this time the atmosphere was entirely different. There were no whispers. There was only absolute, terrifying respect. The masked double doors opened, and the room fell completely silent. Dominic and Beatrice entered. Dominic was the picture of lethal elegance in a bespoke black tuxedo, but it was Beatrice who commanded the room. She wore a custom-designed gown of deep, midnight blue velvet. It didn't try to hide her size or create an illusion of slimness. It embraced her curves, dripping with intricate silver embroidery that caught the light with every step. She wore a necklace of flawless emerald-cut diamonds that rested against her collarbone, a gift from Dominic, symbolizing her sharp cutting brilliance. She was large, she was imposing, and she was undeniably magnificent. They walked down the grand staircase, the crowd parting before them like the Red Sea. Men who had laughed at her a year ago now averted their eyes, bowing their heads in deference. Wives who had pitied her now stared in awe and envy. "Look at them," Dominic murmured in her ear as they reached the floor, his hand resting firmly on the small of her back. "They're terrified of you." "Good," Beatrice replied, keeping her chin high, a serene, regal smile on her face. "Fear is a much better investment than pity. It yields higher returns." Carmine Costello, attending as a highly subdued guest, approached them. He didn't smirk. He didn't swagger. He offered a deep, respectful nod to Dominic, but his eyes darted nervously to Beatrice. "Don Russo," Costello said, his voice tight. "Mrs. Russo, nice. A beautiful evening. I brought a tribute from the New York families. A token of our continued harmonious relationship." "Leave it with Sal, Carmine," Beatrice said dismissively, not even fully turning her head to address him. "And ensure your men stay clear of the South Side docks this month. We have heavy traffic." "Of course, Mrs. Russo." Immediately, Costello bowed slightly and retreated quickly into the crowd. Dominic turned Beatrice to face him, ignoring the hundreds of eyes watching their every move. He pulled her close, his dark eyes burning with a possessive, consuming pride. He wasn't just parading a wife, he was showcasing his greatest weapon, his equal, his queen. "You saved my life, Beatrice," Dominic said softly, the music of the string quartet swelling around them. "You saved my empire." Beatrice rested her hands on his broad shoulders, her green eyes shining with a fierce, unbreakable light. "It's our empire now, Dominic. I just made sure the accounting was correct." "Nah, that," Dominic smiled, leaning down to capture her lips in a deep, bruising kiss right in the center of the ballroom. The flashbulbs of the syndicate's private photographers went off, capturing the image that would define the Chicago underworld for the next century. The Don and his queen, immovable, unstoppable, and deadly to anyone who dared to underestimate them. The end of a dynasty, the birth of an empire. Beatrice didn't just survive the Mafia. She hacked it, owned it, and put every man who mocked her in his place. What was your favorite moment of her ultimate revenge? Would you have the nerve to stare down a federal agent or a rival boss? Oh, I love reading your reactions. If you want more intense, dramatic stories of brilliant underdogs taking over the world,